Hey, how's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my blog. Okay, alright, so as I said at the end of the last one, this one we are going to be talking about character names and some of the character names that I've come up with that I either particularly love or I found particularly interesting and some of the stories behind it and some of the ways in which I go about naming characters. So this could either cover a lot or could get sidetracked. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, so where to start? um, well, I've utilised a number of different, or I utilise a number of different naming conventions when it comes to how and why I name particular characters. So sometimes it's dependent on things like, are they part of a particular family? Is there a particular surname that I've got to take into account because certain names sound better with certain names, and obviously to a certain degree the name has to sound right, and you can't name a character something that sounds a bit janky, or doesn't flow particularly smoothly, especially or doesn't look particularly smooth when you're sort of reading it like or citing it. So like shape and sound are very important things when it comes to me naming my characters, and sometimes I'll have 3, 4, 5 names. Sometimes they'll just have the first name and a surname. Sometimes they'll only ever be known by one name. I do have plenty of characters that are known more by titles than they are by names, or they only have the one name. For those of you who've seen the vlog I did on the Gaians, you'll know that the Gaians technically only have one name, or rather they have a 3-part name written as one word. Things like Archaeoseth and Angela Saria Dre and Gloria Fortharia, those are all written as singular names, but you can hear they are broken into other sort of names within that pattern. And actually the guy names were some of the most fun to come up with for that reason, because it was all about the way the names flowed and it was all about the way the names sounded. I mean, there are a few slightly jankier names in amongst them just because of the context of the story that was being written and certain things that had to be included and in there. So some names ended up a little more janky than I would normally like, but in terms of the funness of creating those names, they were quite fun. I do quite enjoy coming up with those names and how they worked, and the fact that it sounded like multiple names but technically it was one name, and it's just they are amongst some of the more enjoyable for that particular series for coming up with, and especially that particular series where there weren't a whole lot of names I could come up with, because for those of you who aren't aware, all the Gaians that I had named for originate in a YF the fanfic, my series YF the fanfic, which is basically people that I knew or users that I knew on the YF, the Yu-Gi-Oh fan forum. Basically, it was a story using their avatars as character names, or using their screen names for character names, and semi-basing some of the characters off of the relevant person. So I didn't get to name a whole lot of the characters because they already had names. So the names that I did have to come up with for that series were, I think, more memorable and more fun for me because of that. So yeah, so in terms of that's one of the things that's important to me. The name has to sound right. Then there are other things like the name has to also fit the character, which can be a harder way of looking at it. Or the name has to look right when you're looking at it. And for those of you who are aware of J. Richard Peters, which you guys should be, that's the full name of J Hyena Boy for those of you who don't know. go check out some of the vlogs about IlaGolden for more details. To me, J. Rich Peters sounds like a good name, but originally, when I originally came up with a character called Jay, and it was a girl, not a boy, it was Jay Bird. I was 13. Naming conventions weren't such a big thing back then. But, you know, it, to me now that doesn't sound right at all. It's not representative of the character that Jay became. And yes, okay, technically speaking, you could argue initially it was a completely different character, being female and all. But you root something. Once you sort of block onto particular names, you kind of root something, and as you sort of develop the character, the name will either develop with them or the name will go in a completely different direction, and sometimes you then have to rename the character or change the character. And so yeah, naming can be such a complicated kind of process. In terms of some of my favourite names that I've given characters, I've mentioned Body. I mentioned Body. Body is one of my favourite character names as well. For those of you who are not aware, go back to 2 vlogs, to the one about my favourite characters that I've created. Body is one of my favourite characters from the Tale Saga. It's also one of my favourite names for coming up with as well. Don't ask. I sometimes I really love the really simple names. Sometimes even more than I like the really complicated names. In fact, a lot of my characters end up with really simple names, comparatively speaking. Although sometimes, it's just that kind of thing. When you're sort of naming characters, there's no reason why you like a particular name over another particular name, or no real convention for me at least why certain names I prefer to other sorts of names, because there can be like a huge difference. It's like with the series that I'm writing currently, I have a character that goes by Easy, the initials Easy, which is short for his actual name, which is Enderwick Zachamore. Which for me that's a great name. Enderwick Zachamore Fuzz for the full name, and that's a great full name. But I prefer him being Easy because that's who his character is. That's who his character has been since I sort of first conceptualized his character. He's always been Easy, and not his full name, Enderwick Zachamore, even though Enderwick Zachamore sounds like an amazing name. So yeah, it's things like that that, you know, a lot of people might get and they might not get. It depends on, you know, you kind of understand where I'm sort of coming at. So yeah, I'm not sure I understand where I'm coming at right now. So I apologise if you guys are sort of confused. So other names that I've come up with that I find particularly fun or particularly enjoyable for whatever reason. There's Obin, Obin, and Niru, who are twins. And yes, their names are reverses of each other, and that is deliberate. And those were quite fun names to sort of come up with as well. But for sort of different reasons, because there's sort of because the story behind those particular names and everything that was going on with those particular characters that I quite enjoyed. Jake William Hope. And I'm going to call that one out specifically because one of my email addresses, and I'm not going to say which one, but one of my email addresses uses Jake William Hope as part of it. And Jake William Hope is from a 3-part series that I've worked on and off, that at some point I will decide has been finished enough to warrant polishing up. But yeah, I quite like his character, and I quite like the things that I've done with his character. And you know, I can't not shout out that name because I use it as one of my email address names for a reason. Because again, I just like the way it rolls and the way it sounds. Yeah, so as I said, you know, Obin and Nibu, I like more because of the story behind the origin of those names, and Jake William Hope I like because of the way the name sounds, and because I've got a long history with it now, sort of like a more personal history with it, because it's one of those things I've sort of used. In fact, when I first became a member of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans forum, I used two contact emails, and Jake William Hope was one of them, and then one using my actual full name was the other one. And part of that was to sort of deliberately throw people off necessarily knowing whether I was male or female. In fact, part of the reason why I had the email address was a safety thing at the time, because this was, you're talking early 2000s, and the internet it's still not, but the internet was sort of a much more unknown, unsafe sort of place. And being a young woman, I felt safer having this email address that people didn't necessarily know belonged to me. And I still use it, and it's like the one my work is connected to, like my actual day job work has that email address. It's quite funny. From my point of view, it's quite funny. It's like whenever you sort of so I use that one much more as my personal one than I use any of my other email addresses. I do have more than one. And I know this is sort of like a side tangent, but it's quite funny when you're sort of dealing with somebody on the phone and like, can I take an email for you? Yeah, Jake William Hope. You can almost hear them going, right? But I do, I enjoy that particular name. I like the way it sounds, and I like the way it looks, and I like the fact that I've got a personal history with the name. I like the character that the name it belongs to. So all of those things make it one of those names that does sort of stick out and stand out for me. And then jumping back to the Tail Saga again, there's SK, so another character who has initials rather than an actual name being used most of the time. Not that he doesn't have a name, it is in the Tail Saga, but that's a little bit of a spoiler. So if you guys want to know what it is, you need to go and read the Tail Saga. Free link description below. Not that I need to find an excuse every single vlog to send you guys the Tail Saga, but it does help. So yeah, I don't mind having characters that have initial names, because sometimes those initials sound good. Like I like SK, I like the way SK sounds. I like SK's character. He's probably one of my favourite characters within that particular story. And I think it's because he's such an identifiable character. Not in terms of necessarily me being able to identify with him, but in terms of the traits that he has makes him a very identifiable character. You can identify that it's that character because of the certain things that he does. But yeah, there's something about that. And as I said, I like Uzi as a character name as well, because it suits a particular character, and because that's who he was in concept. Even before I worked out that the initials were Enderwick, full Enderwick Zakamore, I knew I liked the way Easy sounded as a name, even though it's not necessarily the greatest name in the world. So going back to the sort of names I like because of the way they sound, you have Kashmana McTay, who I believe I mentioned in the McTay vlog that I did, because I'm pretty sure I did a vlog on the McTays. I'm definitely certain I did a vlog on the McTays. And again, I like the way Kashmana sounds. There's just something about the sound of that name, and Kashmana McTay, just for me, it's a powerful sounding name, but not an unapproachable sounding name either. And as I said, I like the way that it flows, I like the way that it sounds, and it's just, yeah, I'm getting a sense that I like the sound of names more than anything else. It has to sound right. So even if it looks maybe a little bit janky when it's written down, so long as it sounds right and it flows right, I usually end up sticking with it. I usually end up keeping it. So it's like switching tacks and going for like the names in Echo. You've got Echo Sweet Charm. You've got Near Mayfeather. So they're very sort of simple sounding names and very sort of straightforward sounding names, but they sound like names. They sound like names that people could have, and then they flow well. And you know, especially with Echo and Echo Sweet Charm, particularly, that sort of lent itself very easily to the pet name that her father gives her, which is Sweetbat, which I also like. So like when I'm doing my read through of Echo at the moment, every time I see Sweetbat written down, it makes me smile. Because it's kind of like it's such an affectionate name between father and daughter. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's why I enjoy naming characters. Yeah, it's not always the easiest thing to do, but when you find the right name, it either means something to you or it adds something to the character, or there's just something about it that just sticks with you. And you know, I can list off all the names that I've come up with, and I think 90% of them I'll go, oh, I really like that as a name, or I really like the way that sounds, or I really like the character that's attached to that name. So I don't think there are very many names that I've come up with that I would flat out go, oh, I really hate that name, I really hate writing that name, I really wish I could name that character something else, but I feel like that's that character's name now. Um, yeah, I even have a character named Bob. who, because of the character himself, I still wouldn't argue was a bad name for that character, even though that's one of the most generic names. And no offense to anybody called Bob, um, but there is a bit of a for me the reason I find Bob an amusing name to give a character is my first year at university when I was living in student halls. Um, the block or the house that I was living in, um, we had like a few instances, and there was a joke going around those of us living in that house that we had a poltergeist named Bob. So for me, Bob is sort of that's what I associate when you know when anybody ever sort of like says you know come up with a really generic name. I usually go for Bob. Again, no offense to anybody out there named Bob. Bob is a great name, but for me, it's just got those association with, as I said, the poltergeist, the poltergeist. I don't think any of us really believed there was one, um, in that student house, and actually a little bit Blackadder as well. Blackadder the second, the woman who pretends to be a boy. I think she calls herself Bob as well. So yeah, that for me there's something about the name Bob that I just find particularly amusing. But that doesn't mean that I haven't used it as a character name and it hasn't suited the character that I've called it, because it actually totally does. Even when you like learn everything else about the character, it's kind of like, yeah, Bob, yeah, that is Bob. Um, I think that's what it is. Once you kind of name a character and you learn about the character, and there's something about the association between the character and their name, the situation or maybe which you came up with the name for the character, or things that you learn about the character, or the history you have with that character, that then becomes that is who they are. So it becomes hard to dislike the name because you can't disentangle the name itself from all these other things that you associate with the name. So in other words, there are no bad names. And there are only names, and there are names that sound right and that sound great and that you probably prefer the sound of, and there are names that you probably less prefer the sound of, but it doesn't make them bad names. Well, I'm probably spent more of this time babbling than anything else. I do apologise. Um, but yeah, so hopefully you guys have found this one interesting, and forgive me for all my babbling, and forgive me for finding Bob an amusing name. Okay, so the next log is going to be a little bit of a Hyena Boy update vlog. I know I keep doing those ones at the moment. But hopefully, fingers crossed, this will be the last update vlog that will go out before the book is released. Short of something dramatic happening in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, this will be the last one that will go out before the book is released. Part of the reason I want to do it is to let you guys know what's going on with it, let you guys know the rough timescale of when I'm hoping to get it released. For those of you who have been keeping tabs on my channel, you know that I've recently, well, fairly recent to the point in time that I'm filming this, have uploaded a new promo for it, which says that it's coming out this summer. And if you've read the description below, you know that I'm sort of aiming maybe for late July, early August. But I figured I should have some stuff in an update video, and that is going to be next week, and it's going to be a lot shorter than this one because I can be more precise with that. Concise, whatever. Alright, so I hope you guys have found this interesting, especially Bob. Especially you Bobs out there. Hope you've all found this one very interesting. And I will see you next time. See ya! If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of my others, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. See ya!